problem 2, exercise 1513 in your text, is a pretty mathy problem. We're only going to do part A because part B is why you're going to hire some fool from finance to do. You're not going to ever want to do that. That whole what if, that's not a valid question for a senior manager. However, if you can reduce your expenses by X, what will be your change on ROI, return on investment, is a valid question for senior managers. And that's where you're headed. So let's go through this. It's not tough. We just got to do it piece by piece, line by line. Let's get all the pieces. 10% is our return on investment. So our ROI is 10%. And we know return on investment is operating income divided by operating assets. We're told that sales are $300,000 and the amount of total operating assets is $320,000. So, given that, it says what happens if we reduce our expenses by $28,000? Well, before we can reduce our expenses by $28,000, we have to figure out what in the hell they are now. So, we can do that. We just have to take some steps. Okay, remember, operating income is sales minus expense. So I'm going to leave that there. Divided by operating assets is 10%. So all I did was I took operating expense and changed it to sales, or operating income, changed it to sales minus expense, divided it by operating assets. Should make that a little clearer. It's not OPA. I'm not celebrating at a Greek wedding. So we have 10%. Now, continuing down, we have sales minus expense. We're going to multiply both sides by operating assets. We can do that to get rid of it. So we're going to say 10% times operating assets, and they give us the operating assets of $320,000. $320,000. Which I cleverly wrote wrong. So, our operating income is still sales minus expense equals our sales. We have sales, 300,000. We have this is 32,000. Okay. So sales minus expense is that. So we take the 300,000 minus the 32,000, which is what we computed up here. Because to get the expenses, all we need to do is take 10% of our operating assets, because that's our return. That's the expenses, that's the expense portion of the sales. So our sales are $268,000. So we had to go way around the block to come up to that $32,000. But we did it. Once we got to the $32,000, the problem was easy. Okay? And the $32,000, by the way, was the operating income. So we add that back to sales, and that gives us the total. Okay? So if we add the $32,000, 10% of the operating gives us the operating income. Operating income is sales minus expense. So what did the expenses have to be? $268,000. Because this is really the operating income. 10% of our operating assets. It's operating income. So our sales are 268. If we reduce them by 28,000, like the problem asks us to do, what return on investment will result? Well, our expenses will go to 240,000. So our new expenses are 240,000. And when our expenses go to 240,000, to find our new return on investment, we take the 320 let me flip this over so we have room. So our sales stay at 300 because they tell us that the sales stay at 300. See where that came from. Our new expenses go to 240 from 268. That gives us $60,000. And we divide that by our operating assets. Again, they give us that, 320,000. Therefore, our new ROI is 18.75%. And that's a number that managers would be expected to calculate. Let's run through that again. What we're looking for here, we know. We just have to find out what our expenses are. And we can kind of shortcut this. Our sales are now 300 and our operating assets are 320,000. So if we take 10% of that, that's 32,000. That's our return, is our 32,000. And subtract that from our sales, that gives us 268. That's our expenses. Because 32,000, our return is another word for income, is 10%. So, if our sales are 300,000, if our sales are 300,000 and our return, another word for income, another word for profit, is 32,000. The difference between income and sales is expense. 268. Now, if we reduce that by 28, our new expense is 240. That's the way I would do it. I'm lazy. that's the way the book says to do it, that way makes more sense to me. You give me sales, you give me return, I can figure out real quick the difference between sales and return is expenses. My mama raised ugly children, not stupid ones. And once I've got that, I can pretty much do what I want. So either way you figure it out, that's good. I would recommend this way. Remember that return means income, and you're good to go.